Welcome back into the Big Trail Show. Kevin McPherson alongside Evan Camico in this week's Hog Hoops Report. Kevin, season has officially come to an end. Texas Tech taking out Arkansas in the Sweet 16. You and Jacob Morris did a great deep dive of it a couple of days ago. So really, let's focus on kind of the big picture. Let's look at the full season as a whole. What impressed you the most year one under Coach Calipari?
I think the ability to navigate a lot of adversity. When you start talking about a plan coming in to go only 9 deep, it made sense because most rotations go 8 or 9 deep. There was a plan to limit how many high school players you take, shrink down on that, look for more experience, try to get a combination of retention. Calipari did all of that, and everything looked great. And Arkansas had a solid non-conference run, not spectacular, but solid at 11-2. And then you get into SEC play, the league was even better than we thought it would be. And Arkansas gets off to an awful 0-5 start, split a couple of games, picked up that first league win, but then lost again at home. 2 close games, Georgia, then Oklahoma. Now you're 1-6, and you've got sole possession of 15th place in a 16-team SEC. So you went from promising non-conference to looking like this might be the end. And then you start losing your top 2 players, your 2 leading scorers. It started with Boogie Flan, and you're a leader in assist and one of the best in assist to turnover ratio. Then it was Adu Thero later on by the time you'd started winning games. But then, you finished better than you played all year long, even though you got down to a 7-player rotation. You added Flan and Thero back at times in the NCAA tournament, but even by then, they were kind of roll-ish players off the bench and not giving you nearly what you were getting when they were at full strength. And so, to me, this ends up being a huge success. Arkansas was preseason ranked 16th, advanced to a Sweet 16. That meets expectations. No, the conference record wasn't great, but given that 1-6 start to finish 8-10, 9th place, just outside the middle of the pack there, was a strong finish. And so when you look at everything, I think the other thing you have to drill down just a little bit, Evan, and you have to say, well, okay, those were the results. Did players get better? Yes. Not only did you lose your 2 leading scorers, but the guys you brought in with all that tournament experience got off to slow starts and went long parts of the season without performing near to what levels you expected when you looked at Nelly Davis and Jonas Adu. Yet when you got into the NCAA tournament after your first, weekend, when you advanced to the second weekend, those were your 2 leading scorers in the NCAA tournament. So your freshmen, when you looked at Carter Knox and Billy Richmond, got exponentially better as the season wore on. Trevor Brazile looked like what he did prior to his injury 2 years ago, when he was a star out in Maui and came back and hurt that knee and had never been quite the same. You'd see flashes here and there, but he played his best, most consistent basketball of his career coming down the stretch here. So you're looking at individual improvement. You're looking at reasons why you want to retain as many guys as you can off of this roster, because everybody got better and it translated to winning. So I think the overview is this was a success, regardless of a 22-14 record, where many of those losses and even some of the wins where Arkansas looked like the better team, then had those long stretch of implosion and collapses. They found a way to be resilient and win a share of those games. We know that how the season ended was losing another one in that fashion. But still in all, I think when you look at everything based on preseason expectations, the strength of this roster build, and what each player did to get better, to help shape a winning, it was to me, it was a winning narrative when you leave. Arkansas won 7 of its last 10 games and got to a Sweet 16. I don't see how this is anything but a strong success for a reinvigorated John Calipari. I think that's the other part of it, because we know his recruiting, and we'll talk a little bit now about portal here soon, but we know his recruiting is A+ year in and year out. And we know that typically coming from Kentucky with a very few outliers, strong regular seasons, great wins, finishing at the top of the pecking order in the SEC, but a 5-year drought when you really looked at his postseasons, to say he's anything but reinvigorated would be probably a dishonest take. I think a legendary, a coaching, living coaching legend already in the Naismith Hall of Fame by over a decade to show like he did this year at Arkansas. This was probably his best season coaching in a while. And he even said at the end of it, this was one of his most rewarding. And we know this career spans decades
Mhm.
at 4 programs where he's had unprecedented success. So I think this was a win all the way around. I know there's probably still a little sting from Thursday for fans and how that game ended. But at the same time, when you look at it, the totality of it, now we start talking about what does net year 2 look like, not just in terms of recruiting, but your strategy for your roster and things that you identify that you want to improve on.
Yeah, and that's the overarching theme, right? Is that we look at this season as a whole, and now that we can sit back, breathe, relax, and take a step and kind of look at it from that 1,000-foot perspective, you can't not be unhappy with how the season ended. You were going to be top 16, like you've already said. You finished in the Sweet 16. Yeah, would you like to maybe close some of those late games and maybe win 25, 26 games? Sure, but beggars can't be choosers. You still got to where you needed to. It was the first time Cal made that second weekend since 2019, and overall, again, it was a success. You lost Derek Musselman last year. Arkansas did it, and everyone's thinking, oh my goodness, what's going to happen now? And then you have this weird, musical chairs where Cal comes over and Mark Pope goes to Kentucky. BYU gets a new coach. And at the end of the day, all those 3 programs got to places where they wanted to, and that was the expectation. So I think everybody who is trying to compare Arkansas and Kentucky, because at the end of the day, that's going to be the comparison over the next 4 years, or however long John Calipari is still the head coach here at Arkansas. Year 1, nothing but a success. Again, you'd like to win more games, of course, but beggars can't be choosers. And the question now, as we move into year 2, is what's this roster going to look like? Who's going to come back? Are you going to see Carter Knox and Billy Richmond in Arkansas uniforms? What about DJ Wagner? There's a lot of questions now up in the air because it's transfer portal season, and that's a whole other debate for another time where guys are leaving their programs in the middle of Sweet 16 runs. But for this Arkansas program, where do you see the future direction for that 25-26 season?
Well, I think first of all, you're examining your roster depth. I think that was one of the biggest things we identified back in the summer when we knew what it was. You looked around and you're like, they don't have a lot of pieces on the front line. It was more backcourt heavy. You only go 9 deep, and you're starting to immediately think every year now you see the attrition with injuries, illness, foul trouble within games that changes what you can do. And so we always question how deep should Arkansas go? And I'm told, I have sources telling me that the resources are going to be there for NIL for Calipari to expand this at least to 11. So
Mm-hmm.
go from 9 to 11, I think would be a big step to help there. One of the other things we identified, again, preseason before we got into it, looking at it was, where maybe some question marks with physicality on the few frontline guys you have. Question marks about 3-point shooting. I think this recruiting cycle, especially in the portal, especially going after veteran players, you got to address those things. You had an outstanding high school signing class per the norm for Calipari, top 5 ranked. Darius Avecuff Jr. already blowing up at the McDonald's All-American event. Starts over the weekend. The game's Tuesday in Brooklyn, New York at the Barclays Center. But just showing out during their practice scrimmage event over the weekend so far. Malik Thomas, the other top 10 rated 5-star guard that's coming in. We know Isaiah Sealy. So you've got a 3-player haul there. You've got Kareem Ratal, a 20-year-old Lebanese international player, a 3-4 combo, 6'9", 6'8", 6'9" guy coming in. So you've got 4 players on board. You're talking about retention as well. We're looking at that. The usual suspects when you talk retention: DJ Wagner, Carter Knox, Billy Richmond III, Trevor Brazil, Big Z, Zvonimir Avicic. Those are the 5, because out of 9 players, 2 of those, Jonas Adu and Nelly Davis, have, their eligibility has expired. I don't know if there's any kind of a waiver process for them to go through to get an extra year. I don't think there's anything there for that.
Maybe a
And I haven't
crazy
heard
like
anything.
seventh year COVID kind of thing, potentially.
Well, you see stuff all the time, and you never know what loophole, but I don't foresee a path for
Yeah.
that. And then it comes down to, we've heard all along, Thero and Boogie Fland, Thero and Boogie Fland are likely going in the draft. I spoke with an NBA agent on Saturday, just yesterday, and he said, look, Fland, I've got him right now. This is prior to combine, if they get invited to combine, and what those measurables and how that performance would look, or individual team workouts. Before all that gets going, He's projecting Fland as anywhere from 25th to 35th, maybe 40th. So that's late first round, early second round. That's his projection, this NBA scout for Fland. For Thero, he ranged him from 40 to 60. He thinks at the end of the day, that's probably where that lands. He goes, but keep an eye on combine stuff, team workouts. All it takes is one team to fall in love, and that can shift it. But the point is will either one of those guys consider coming back? I mean, to me right now, looking at it, I'd say Fland is less likely to come back. And Thero probably not likely, but maybe a little more likely to consider it. We just got to see, because those calculations and dynamics can change on a dime based on feedback. I expect both to at minimum enter their names and declare for the draft and test the waters. But I think Fland stays in, and I think Thero likely is gone. But we'll see if that changes. My opinion changes. So I just went through the four names at the high school plus the international Lebanese forward that you've got on board in this 2025 recruiting class so far, and the five guys that are probably the most likely that you're going to try to retain. Well, that would get you to 9 right there. I think Arkansas is going to add at least 2 more. I'm
Mhm.
not sure that they're going to keep 5 of the guys that were on this past roster, and I think they probably end up with somewhere between 2 to 4 players out of the portal. And I hope we get a chance here for a minute to talk about some of the names on the early list right now and guys that Arkansas is already prioritizing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at the roster and the question marks is how do you move forward? And, what do you still need? Because it seems like right now, if TV and Big Z are question marks, you probably need another big to come in as well. So let's talk about it. Let's jump right into it. What are you hearing out of the transfer portal? What are the targets that Arkansas could potentially go after and bring in to make this 2025, 2026 roster?
Yeah, so we were talking just a minute ago when we were looking in the preseason what some of the potential weaknesses were, and we saw it during the season. 3-point shooting was part of that. And so Calipari, if you want to, he's already identified he's going to get more veteran players and use the portal in balance with retention in high school. And so one of the first names out there is Lamar Wilkerson, a 6'5" guard from Ashdown, Arkansas. Spent the last 3 seasons after a year in JUCO at Sam Houston State and Conference USA. Conference USA Player of the Year last year. 20.5 points per game, 4 rebounds, just over 2 assists, just over 1 steal per game. But what I like about it, Evan, is a 44.5% shooter from 3 on nearly 8 field goal attempts per game, 3-point field goal attempts per game, nearly 8. So it puts him in that same comparison range as a guy like Chaz Lanier at
Hmm.
Tennessee. Not exactly the same player, but a volume scorer who puts up an elite volume of threes, making him at an elite clip. He was doing that at North Florida and just transferred that to Tennessee. You never know about coming from mid-major to high major, how that translates. But Wilkerson fits a bill. I spoke with him on the phone a couple of days ago. He mentioned to me, it's every kid's dream that grew up in the state to play for the Razorbacks. He helped Ashdown, by the way, to a 3A state title. I was there covering that game, covered him in high school back in 2019, the 18-19 season. So you talk about guys in the college game for a while now. He's also got his name entered into the NBA draft, declared for the draft to test those waters. But Kentucky, Duke, Louisville, Kansas are some of the teams mentioned, Alabama with him. In addition to Arkansas, I've got sources telling me that Arkansas is kind of thought to be the leader in the clubhouse, that the mutual interest between Wilkerson and Arkansas goes back to mid-season. And so I can't share everything that we talked about, but he is going to start taking visits. He told me after the Final Four is over, I expect Arkansas to be heavily in the mix. Their NIL is going to impact this like everything else. These high
Hmm.
caliber guys, you heard the teams after him in addition to Arkansas. And so at the end of the day, it comes down to Calipari and his staff's NIL valuations on players. There's a range there, and there will be a place where they're very comfortable being the leader in NIL. And there may come a time, like we've seen in the past, where they dip and get out because they're not willing to go somewhere that maybe another team will. So all things being equal in NIL, Arkansas looks to be the favorite to me. Now, another name, Arkansas is very heavily in the mix, and I reported on this on my Hogville Net YouTube Live back on March 22nd, a couple of days before the portal officially opened. Keyshawn Hall, a 6'7" big wing 3-4 combo out of Central Florida in the portal. I mentioned that he would be going to the portal and Arkansas would be in play there. when that happens. Sure enough, that's the case. I interviewed him today. I've already got an article published at hogville.net as well as KNWA Pig Trail Nation website. But he told me, this time a year ago when he was getting in the portal from George Mason, he had Arkansas in his Final Four. We reported that then. But he said today, I like Calipari. I've been talking with Chin Coleman, associate coach, and Ronnie Brewer heavily, but I like Calipari and what he's done with the program out of the gates, that they were able to push through adversity. And he said he remembered when he was being recruited a year ago by Musselman, Eric Patrick Musselman, and that staff, but that when he watches Arkansas games, he loves the fan support, he loves the atmosphere. And he said something to the effect of, the fans are in it for the Hogs until the end. And he really likes that. And he said he's looking for a place. Keyshawn Hall, again, 6'7", out of the Big 12, looking for a place where he can get to an NCAA tournament. He hasn't experienced that in his career playing this past season at Central Florida. I mentioned George Mason before. His freshman season, he was at UNLV. So this is a guy that gets around, but he said, I want to go somewhere where I can get to an NCAA tournament, win big, and without limiting my role. Now, look, he was the Big 12's leading scorer this past season, nearly 19 points per game, 8 rebounds, 2.5 assists, and he shoots over 35% from three on nearly 4 attempts per game and over 80% at the free throw line. But he is a lefty slasher, a competent three-point shooter. He finishes through contact, draws over 6 fouls per game, and shoots over 7 free throws per game. But all Big 12 this last season, and Arkansas is heavily in the mix. And I left the most important part out after talking to him. He said, I'm going to set up a Zoom call with Arkansas's coaching staff in the next day or two. Now, he just had a Zoom with Kansas, and he having one with Kentucky on Monday. A ton of high majors after him, but he's a guy, if you're thinking about maybe the kind of guy that could plug into that 3-4 combo. Strong, 6'7", 235, similar size-wise to a Duthero, not as explosive, but much more skilled offensively. When you talk about his finishing craft, a lot more finesse in his game, power and finesse, and he could shoot the three a little bit. And when you're talking about Wilkerson, who I mentioned first, you're thinking a guy that could slide in and kind of fill a role like a Nelly Davis, play that 2 and 3 for you. And you're talking about 2 veteran guys. Now, neither of these guys had the NCAA tournament success or NCAA tournament pedigree, period. When you looked at why Nelly Davis was partly brought in, wasn't just the volume and production, but the fact that he had Final Four experience and then another season before he transferred back in the NCAA tournament. But those are 2 names to keep an eye on. We mentioned Frontline. We're keeping eyes on guys Arkansas has already contacted. South Carolina and former Alabama big man, 6'10", 6'11", Nick Pringle, who put 18 and 9 on the Hogs in that South Carolina win in their home. He's in the portal. Arkansas has been in contact with him. I like Moritz Johnson out of Illinois, who gave Arkansas fits in that loss on Turkey Day in Kansas City. He's in the portal. But you look at other big men, Somptu Cyril and potentially Jaden Quaintance. Cyril at Georgia, Quaintance at Arizona State this past year. Both of those guys signed with Calipari out of high school to play at Kentucky. Did not follow him to Arkansas, but both big men. Quaintance 6'9", 6'10", Somptu Cyril 6'10", 6'11", both of them strong interior presence. Keep an eye on those 2. There are other names out there. Big Z, does he go in the portal to play with his brother Tomislav in Illinois? Does Tomislav Ivicic get in the portal to come maybe consider playing with Big Z at Arkansas? There are a lot of names front line and backcourt, and your needs are obviously going to be determined by how many guys you retain in addition to what you get out of the high school ranks. And don't forget, mention the McDonald's All-American game, both Malik Thomas and Acuff Jr. in that, but so is Nate Ament, the class of 2025 5-star top 5 rated 6'9" combo forward out of Virginia. He visited Arkansas in early March. So earlier this month, we know he's down to a Final 5 that includes Arkansas, Duke, Louisville, who am I leaving out here? Tennessee and Kentucky, plus the Hogs. And he's going to make that decision. I keep hearing Duke or Louisville, but you just never know. He makes his announcement on April 1st. That's Tuesday, just a couple of days, day of a McDonald's All-American game. So we're going to find out a lot here in the days coming ahead about retention, about what Ament's going to do and then what Arkansas is getting out of the portal. I've mentioned some names already, but keep an eye again initially out of the gates on guys like Lamar Wilkerson and Keyshawn Hall.
Yeah, really exciting time with the portal. Everything's going to happen really fast over the next month or so. So we'll have a better idea then. Kevin, anything else we missed before we go?
Probably, but I don't have it at the tip of my tongue right now. So, just I think the last thing here is that I think Calipari really instilled what the promise of this program can be under his leadership in year one. I really believe that. And I look at him and I look at his body language. I look at his tempo when he talks. He's a master behind the microphone, but there's a genuineness. And I don't think you can see anything other than the idea that he's happy at Arkansas. And it's a productive first year that's moving the program in a direction you want to go. I know we just said that in the first part. I just want to kind of cap it again with that thought because that's what I see.
Yeah, and Kevin, when you look at it, and I loved when he was asked in his presser about being in this area, and he's like, the little post-it stamp, on the letter in the state, which is Northwest Arkansas. So talking about Springdale, Bentonville, Fayetteville, and Rogers, of just being a really fun area and him really enjoying it and moving here. And it's all genuine. And it feels like that's the kind of person he is, where you see that at Kentucky. But, again, with sports and, we put, labels on people, and Cal, for a lot of people, is a villain, right? Like, he is hated around the country by a lot of people, but the reality is, I think Arkansas fans had their perception of Cal shifted, and just what he's done not only here at Northwest Arkansas and in Fayetteville, but also around the state, and as well as bringing back the history and everything that Arkansas basketball is, to bring that to the modern day and connect the past with the present, is something that's really special.
Yeah, I mean, look, this NCAA tournament, I think, kind of restored some of the belief in what he can accomplish once it gets to March. I mean, it's the winningest active coach in the NCAA tournament. He's now one of two coaches to take four different programs to a Sweet 16. Of course, that was UMass, then Memphis, Kentucky, and now Arkansas. But he's building on what's already been a Naismith Hall of Fame resume because he was inducted over a decade ago in the 2010s. But you're not going to change everybody's opinion of you at 66 years old after decades and decades of having a lot of success, but also being sort of a lightning rod. I mean, he's been that everywhere he's been. There's been some controversy there, so you're right. But to go head to head in this tournament, it wasn't just the Sweet 16. He beat Bill Self and Rick Pitino, two more blue blood coaches who also are Naismith Hall of Famers, going back to enshrinements in the 2010s. So there was a couple of more feathers in the cap when you look at it that way. So you got to be proud if you're an Arkansas Razorback fan of riding with that level of coach. I mean, Arkansas's got a great history. You have two Naismith Hall of Fame coaches already, and Eddie Sutton, followed by Nolan Richardson, the GOAT. The latter was the GOAT, getting the program's only national title. You played in the toughest conference in the country this year, and you showed up and showed out when it got real. And that's all thanks to John Calipari's leadership. You have to give credit when things go well, the same as you do when you examine things when things don't. But this was a strong first season, and I can promise you, most of Big Blue Nation was cheering against this, at least half of it, and they didn't see this coming. And I think a lot of Razorback fans that invested their hope in it were richly rewarded with how this thing. I don't even want to use the word ended because we're just getting started.
Absolutely. The end is always a beginning, and we're on to year two now of the John Calipari era here at Arkansas. That's going to do it for the Hog Hoops Report. For Kevin McPherson, I'm Evan Camico. More Pig Trail Show coming up after the break.